UFC 330 is this weekend. Welcome to Castle's MMA Breakdown. We have two title fights. We have Gillian Robertson challenging Mackenzie Dern for the women's strawweight title, and we have Ian Garry challenging Islam Makhachev for the world welterweight title. Where better to start, guys, than on the first fight of the card? I've had to record this video twice due to a few technical issues. The fight order changing, yeah, it's been a bit stressful. Doesn't help it's 33 degrees outside, English weather. First up, I can't say his name, but I'm going to go Orolbai versus Jeremiah Wells. Jeremiah Wells, 13-4-1, 39 years old, 5'9". We have Orolbai coming in 16-2-1, 28 years old, 5'10". Jeremiah Wells, you know, never getting anywhere near the rankings in the welterweight division. Decent fighter. I think he has some decent power. You know, he's got some strong wrestling. However, his jiu-jitsu game is a bit questionable sometimes. The decisions that he makes as he tries to exit these exchanges where he's been choked unconscious before. And he's fighting Orolbai. Orolbai is, one of the UFC favourite fighters at the moment. The fans love the guy, love the way that he looks, but just love his style. Like, the guy, the pressure is relentless. He's got great striking, great wrestling, great jiu-jitsu skills, and he's constantly looking for the finish. I think he was really struggling to make that 155 limit, and I think that's why he struggled against Rebekchi, someone who, will never give up kind of fighter. But then since he's moved up to welterweight, he's looked unstoppable. He looks like he's got the touch of death with his hands. He's got fantastic wrestling. And his jiu-jitsu was great as well. I think it's just going to be too much for Jeremiah Wells here. I think no matter where the fight goes, Orolbai controls it. And I think for the first minute and a half, he'll be striking on the feet. And I think he'll be cautious with Wells' power early. But I think Orolbai will more than handle himself on the feet, maybe even touch the chin of Wells. And then I think when Wells starts to react a bit more, that's when Orolbai will shoot. I think he'll easily get the takedown. I think he'll easily, pass guard, whatever he wants to do. And I think Wells will just make a mistake on the mat. I think he'll roll over trying to escape, and I think he'll end up in a rear naked choke or something like that. And I think it will be early. I'm going to go Orolbai round 1 submission. Next on the card, we have Neil Magny versus Ramiz Brahimaj. Neil Magny with a record of 31-14, 39 years old, 6'3". Against Brahimaj on the other side, 13-6, 33 years old and 5'10". I'll start with Brahimaj. This guy has fantastic jiu-jitsu, finished the vast majority of his wins by submission. Has really started coming into his own in the UFC, submitting Vanderford, which is a great look. And that was someone who is, a very good standard wrestler. But then he's also got a bit of pop in his hands as well. He knocked out Mickey Gall. Looks like he's starting to really develop as a mixed martial artist. He is facing Neil Magny. Neil Magny, is not known for being great anywhere. His jiu-jitsu skills are okay offensively, but defensively are very poor. He's been submitted 50% of his losses. He started to look a bit chinny. He's been knocked out a couple of times, and he's known for just making fights dirty. Not the most entertaining fighter, where he'll cage push or he'll use his offensive wrestling just to stay in control. But the guy, has had a couple of comeback wins, where Mike Malott, for example, where he finished him late. The Jake Matthews, which is still one of the worst decisions I've seen. Jake Matthews had the submission. It was given as a submission, and then the ref said carry on. Jake Matthews was celebrating, adrenaline dump. He still almost subbed him again in the second round, but unbelievable that the referee started that fight. I think in this fight, the only way that Magny wins this fight is if he uses the grappling. He uses the grappling, but stays safe doing it and makes his fight as boring as possible. I don't think Magny is as good of a wrestler as Austin Vanderford is. And Vanderford, got subbed by Brahimaj, and I can see something here. Brahimaj is going to be really explosive on the feet. He's going to have a lot of confidence because Magny's not going to hurt him on the feet. So I think Brahimaj will land a couple of big shots. I think Magny will sloppily go for a takedown, and you're right, guys, it's coming again, another submission. I'm going to say Brahimaj will get round 1, maybe guillotine or something similar to that. I think Magny's just too poor. with his defensive side of grappling, and I think Brahim Maj will snatch that neck. Next up, we have Rafael Tobias, 14-2, 23 years old. Surely he's not 23 years old. I'm 35 this year. I look younger than he does. He's 6'2" in the light heavyweight division against 13-3 Lucas Fernando, making his main UFC debut. 29 years old, 6'3". Now, start with Tobias. Tobias is an alright fighter everywhere. And I think he's looked really good on the regional scene, coming the UFC, and was very, very disappointing in his first fight. He was fighting Nurgazai, who was on a skid. The way to beat Nurgazai is take him down, work the jiu-jitsu game, and Tobias just looked poor everywhere that the fight was, and just started getting tagged by Nurgazai when he was tired. I wasn't impressed with him at all. And I think he will come unstuck, and I think he could come unstuck here. Lucas Fernando, on the other hand, he's not he looks slow, a slow light heavyweight, but I tell you what, his strikes have a lot of power on, and it's his shot selection. I watched a few videos of him. The shot selection, head, the body, whether it was, with his fists, with his kicks, the body shots were just eating away at people. Then he'd hit the leg kicks. He would hurt someone. He would get down. He would stay safe on the mat, land huge hammer fists. And I just think the way his style is, it will suit him against Tobias. I think Tobias is going to be swinging big like he does, maybe trying the grappling exchange, and I don't think Tobias has the cardio to cope with that. What I can see in the first round, Tobias swinging wildly, very 50-50 until towards the end of the first round, when Tobias is starting to get a bit tired, had a few takedown stuffed. And I think in the second round, Lucas Fernando will really take over. I think he'll really, heavily invest in the body. And I think what I could see, I think he could just make Tobias kind of give up in there. So I'm going to go end of the second round. I'm going to go Fernando with the TKO. Next up, sorry guys, I picked 3 finishes there. I know this doesn't normally happen. Next up, we have Vicente Luque, 24-12-1, 34 years old, 5'11" against Trejon Gore, 6'4", 32, 6 foot. Now this fight again is in the middleweight division, which I don't think Luque is a middleweight, but I'll touch base on Luque first. Luque has been a staple of the welterweight division for years. Big name in the UFC, obviously coming off the back of a few weird performances, but then he's just submitted Gastelum, submitted Garimbo. I know nowadays these aren't 2 really good wins. I do love Gastelum. I've always loved Gastelum, but the guy is really poor on the ground with the jiu-jitsu exchanges. Garimbo, clumsy wrestler. His neck was there to be taken. Apart from that, though, Luque had some, he finished by Buckley in a terrible performance. Jeff Neal destroyed him, and he had, like brain issues. He came out and fought, Dos Anjos, and just wrestled him the whole time. And yes, he held down Dos Anjos, but people, Dos Anjos was a lightweight champion. Wasn't really a welterweight. He just didn't want to cut the weight anymore, and I just think that's why Luque used that strategy. I do like Dos Anjos, but he's not really good off his back, and I think Luque, it was a smart thing to do. He's fighting Trejon Gore. Trejon Gore, 6-4 record, but he's not a 6-4 fighter. For me, he's more of a 12-4 fighter, because he's came at the UFC straight away. He's fought some really good competition. He's looked poor sometimes, and then sometimes he's looked great. He's had a couple of nasty submissions, and that's what I'm going to touch on here. Gore in his last fight against Bakoev, and Bakoev is a heavy wrestler. And Bakoev was hardly touted when he came in the UFC, and was expected to beat Gore handedly. Gore made him work every time he went for a takedown, and it sapped the energy of Bakoev. Gore was, showing his hands a lot more, because I think Gore's got the power. I just think he's very low volume, and he landed some great strikes. And he made Bakoev panic. He made him panic wrestle because of exhaustion, and it happened again. That guillotine I'm sorry, when you get locked in a guillotine with Gore, it's done. It's done, it's over, because he has the nastiest squeeze I've ever seen. Picking people up with a guillotine is insane. And I think that's what could happen here. I think Luque will get hurt on the feet. I think he'll struggle with the takedowns, and it'll come a desperate one again. And I think he'll go straight into that guillotine of Gore, and it's over. I think he'll tap out. So I'm going to go Gore via submission. I do think Luke is a better mixed martial artist, but you know, in fight years he's 54, in Gore in fight years 22. So I think you're going to see, you know, it's going to look like a youngster against an older here, and there's only 2 years between them. So I'm going to go Gore. I'm going to go third round submission. Next up, we have Dontae Johnson, 8-0, 27, 5'8" against Eric McConaughey, 11-4-1. Eric McConaughey, you know, I don't really think he's UFC caliber, if I'm honest with you. I know he has just had a win over Rodolfo Vieira, but it looks like anyone that can kind of stuff the takedowns from Vieira is safe, because obviously when Vieira's on the mat, it's over quickly. But if you can keep him on the feet and stuff the takedowns, his wrestling isn't great, you can kind of win. You know, it wasn't a great performance. You know, in play I backed McConaughey, but I just wasn't impressed with it. He's not great anywhere. You know, he hasn't got raw knockout power, steady striking, can mix, you know, the wrestling sometimes, but he's not really a good fighter. And he's fighting Dontae Johnson, who everyone was talking about. But then he's kind of looked a bit poor, and I wasn't impressed with Dontae Johnson. I do think that, you know, lovely O is going to go very, very soon. But I don't think it goes here. You know, I think he's realised he didn't look good in his last fight. And what he done is he switched teams. He's down with Sean Strickland and Anthony Hernandez. And I just think that is going to make him better. You know, I was watching him. He was sparring with Sean Strickland, and wow, Sean Strickland tagged him so many times. It was unbelievable. And that is worrying going forward. However, I did like the angles that Dontae Johnson was working. You know, he looked like he had really stylish boxing, and he was moving like Dominic Cruz does. And he was making angles from everywhere. And I just think Eric McConaughey hasn't really got that good of a chin. I think Dontae Johnson, he's young, he's powerful, he's quick, and I think he's just going to be a bit too much for Eric McConaughey. Sometimes looks like he's a bit stuck in the mud. So I'm going to go Dontae Johnson, first round knockout. Next up, we've got a fight that I'm not really looking forward to, if I'm honest with you. We have Esteban Ribovic, 15-3, 30 years old, 5'10", against Edson Barbosa, 24-14, 40 years old and 5'11". The reason why I'm not looking forward to this, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, this is going to be a war. It's not. Edson Barbosa is every part of 40 at the moment. Has looked poor for a number of years. Like, look at that 14 losses. That has just increased so much over the last 4 or 5 years. Brutally knocked out by Jalen Turner. I just think he really struggles with anyone who gives him any kind of pressure. Edson Barbosa, obviously known for beautiful leg kicks, beautiful spinning attacks, whether it's to the body, to the head, you know, decent hands as well. But he's mainly known for his kicking. Hasn't really got a ground game, you know, struggles with a jiu-jitsu practitioner. But in this fight, he's going to kind of get what he likes, you know, a striking fight with Esteban Ribovic. Now, what I can see here, well, firstly, I'll touch on Ribovic. Ribovic is purely just a striker, a marauder, likes to come forward. He's had some great fights with anyone who will entertain him on the feet. You know, Terence McKinney knocked him out. The great fight he had with Zellhuber. But then as soon as someone can wrestle a bit, he kind of runs out of answers like he did against Gamrot. But this is perfect for Ribovic here to get back on the winning column. I can see Edson Barbosa looking great for about a minute and a half. You know, landing the leg kicks, a few spinning attacks, because Ribovic is just going to come forward. But I think it's a matter of time. I think it's just as soon as Ribovic lands that one big shot, I think it's over. I think Ribovic will land big, swarm him, and we'll get Barbosa out of there. And I think this will be Barbosa's last fight. I think he'll retire after this fight and put the gloves down. He's been a legend in the UFC, but this is not the fight that I wanted him to see. I wanted him to take. I'd rather him fight someone lower level. But yeah, I'm going to go Ribovic, first round knockout. And I think it could be really bad, very one-sided. Next up, I did this video and I had to change it because of the bout order, and this is the main one. This Charles Johnson was on the main card, and unfortunately for him, Jose Ochoa pulled out, so he's got a late replacement in Eduardo Henrique. You know, Eduardo Henrique, I don't really know much about. I'll be honest with you guys. There's no point me, lying to you. But I've watched a few videos. He looks decent. Looks decent everywhere. You know, he's got wrestling in his back pocket. Quite decent striking. 15-2 record, 30 years old, 5'7". You know, he looks solid for the flyweight division. I believe this fight's happening at £130 or maybe 135. You know, so Eduardo Henrique will look okay. He's fought about a month ago now. One thing for me is when someone's fought about a month ago, they're not. Yeah, they say I'm in the gym, but they're not doing a full fight camp. They're not. They've probably been eating loads of crap. Relaxing for a week or two after their fight. It normally happens. Resting up. I don't think he's going to be 100% going into this, and I think this is what's going to suit Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson, 19'9", 35, 5'9". Charles Johnson, the most frustrating fighter for me, has beaten, like Lorna Kavanagh. He's beaten Joshua Van. And then he just looks like sparked out by Alex Perez, subbed standing up by Almabayev, just sometimes looks poor. But I think this fight, and the late notice of it, will suit Charles Johnson. I think Henrique will look really good in the first round. Charles Johnson has a habit of, dropping the first round. But then I think Eduardo will tire towards the end of round 1, round 2. And I think Charles Johnson he'll take over, and I think he'll cruise to a 29-28 decision here. I think he'll use his striking. I can't see him getting a finish, but what would be clever for Charles Johnson is mix everything up, wrestle heavy, especially in the second round or even the first round. Drain that gas tank, because he's going to have the cardio to keep going. And then, look to drown Henrique, who I think is tough and I think will survive. But, yeah, Charles Johnson, 29-28 unanimous decision, I'm feeling. And moving up the card, another kind of late-ish replacement, I think happened about 2 or 3 weeks ago. You have Chidi Njokuani, 25-12, 37 years old, 6'3", in the welterweight division, against Joel Alvarez, 23-4, 33 years old, 6'3". Now in this fight, Chidi obviously campaigned a lot of middleweight, so he's coming down at 170. Joel Alvarez campaigned a lot of lightweight, and he's going up to 170. So it's one of them. Is there going to be a huge power difference between the two? There could well be. Now Chidi, obviously we know he's a very good distance striker, great kickboxing. He's had some flashy knockouts, really good performances, but he really struggles with the ground game, wrestlers, anyone with decent jiu-jitsu. But on the feet, he looks really classy. He's really tidy. Doesn't really take many risks. He doesn't like to get in any brawls. Lovely knees up the middle to the body, etc. So yeah, I like watching Chidi. He's one for the striking fans. Against Joel Alvarez, again, another exciting fighter. Always wants to get the finish. Looked unstoppable at 155, but you could tell he was really struggling to make the weight. His only loss in the UFC came to Arman Tsarukyan until recently, when he made his welterweight debut against Amosov, which is a big ask. And I think Amosov is one of them guys who was decent striking, but Alvarez was cleaner. But the wrestling, Amosov has really good wrestling, really good jiu-jitsu, and I think that he kind of caught Alvarez off guard. I think Alvarez was just expecting Amosov to lay there and hold him down, but got caught in a submission, and yeah, it was a bit disappointing for me, and I think Alvarez is going to want to bounce back here. It just depends what Alvarez's game plan is. I think striking with Chidi is dangerous. You're fighting a guy who was fought at 185 before you fought at 155. That's, a 30-pound difference. This guy holds power. You be clever. Initiate the clinch, maybe use the takedowns. Joel Alvarez, I know a lot of people think he's a power puncher, but most of his wins are submissions, and I think what makes sense here is for him to use his ground game. What always sticks out with Njokuani was when he fought Matthews, and how easy Matthews, got him standing up on the back and got the submission, and I can see that happening here. I'm going to go Joel Alvarez first round submission. It'll be a good fight for as long as it lasts. Next up, we have Mansour Abdul Malik, 9-1-1, 28 years old, 6'2", against Dustin Stoltzfus, 16-8, 34, 6 foot. Stoltzfus, he's a decent fighter. He's just decent everywhere. He's had a couple of good wins, but overall, he's mainly losing in the UFC. He has sneaky power, actually. I've seen him drop a few people and have some good wars. Got some decent wrestling. He's had some good wins. Decent jiu-jitsu game as well. But he's fighting Malik. Malik is very young. And Malik, he didn't look good against Cody Brundage. He didn't look good against Belguri. But Belguri is a good fighter. He is a really good fighter. And I just think, for me, I don't like fighters who come in with this shiny record. And I always like to use Peyton Talbot's an example. Everyone fraud checked, lost to Raoni, but fraud checked. Now look how good Talbot has looked since he lost. You know, these young fighters kind of get a chip on the shoulder, right? I've lost, I'm never losing again. And they kind of know what they need to go to the next step. Dante Johnson, for example, didn't lose his oar, but he realised that performance was poor. I need to be better. Can these coaches take me further? And I think Malik is going to come out a different animal here. I think he's better than Stoltzfus everywhere. I don't think Stoltzfus has a great gas tank to, you know, maybe drown Malik. I think Malik is going to have a severe power advantage. And I think what he'll get here, I think Malik will get an easy, you know, round 1 knockout. Now, this fight has been moved up the card. I'm really happy with this because I didn't understand why Charles Johnson was so high and these two guys weren't, you know, very entertaining fighters. We have Jalin Turner, 15-9, 31 years old, 6'3", massive for the lightweight division, against Cal Fernandez, the surging Cal Fernandez, 11-2, 31 years old, 5'9". I'll start with Jalin Turner. Jalin Turner is good everywhere, you know. He has beautiful striking, a lot of power in his hands. He gets a lot of finishes, you know, dusted off Bobby Green or King Green, should I say, Edson Barbosa relatively easily. And he has a sneaky jiu-jitsu game if it needs to go there. And he's fighting Cal Fernandez. Cal Fernandez, you know, a very good striker, but Fernandez, for me, is the best leg kicker in the UFC at this moment in time. Not ever, before anyone jumps down my throat. I just think at this moment in time, he uses that better than anyone. You know, that he brutalised Kutaladze, who managed to stay on his feet, brutalised Harry Hardwick, you know, sent the guy to hospital, both legs shattered. And I think I love Jalin Turner and I love his striking, but in this fight for me, Jalin Turner is so tall. There's not a lot of meat on them legs, guys. You know, he's skinny legs, and I just think that if Cal Fernandez can find his range with the leg kicks, this could be a long night for Jalin Turner. And I think Jalin Turner retired, you know, about a year and a half ago because he lost. I think he's got a bit of quit in him. That might be harsh to say, but I think he was losing and he was like, I hate losing, I can't cope with it, and he was quitting. I just think in this fight, if Jalin Turner can stay out of the way of the leg kicks, I think he's a better mixed martial artist, but I just don't think he can. So what I think will happen here is Cal Fernandez will really, first round, he'll land maybe 6 or 7 huge leg kicks that'll really wobble Jalin Turner. He'll keep changing stance. I think he'll come out in the second round and I think he'll break him. I think Fernandez could win this fight by barely landing any shots to the head of Turner and just landing leg kicks. So I'm going to go leg kick TKO round 2 for Cal Fernandez. And I think, you know, this is good to get him in the rankings. And I'd like to see him, you know, against better opposition that could stop the leg kicks. I just think Turner, with his height, them legs are going to be there to, you know, for the taking. Co-main event time. We have a strawweight title bout between Mackenzie Dern versus Gillian Robertson. Gillian Robertson, 17-8, 31 years old, 5'5". Gillian Robertson, you know, she's exciting for the women's division. And what I like about it is, yes, she wrestles a lot, but when she wrestles and goes to the ground, she's actively looking for the finish. You know, she's dangerous with the ground and pound. She'll use the ground and pound to force a mistake from her opponent. If that mistake comes, she's got decent jiu-jitsu, obviously, to get the finish as well. When it's on the feet, she's not great, you know, striking. She hasn't got that arsenal where she could switch stances, hit the leg kicks or anything like that. She is, you know, primarily looking to take this to the ground. Mackenzie Dern, on the other hand, obviously she's worked on her boxing a lot recently, and I think her striking has improved loads. And I do think Mackenzie Dern has sneaky power for this division. Mackenzie, though, has that elite jiu-jitsu. As soon as it hits the mat, you know, she's confident of getting back up off the floor, threatening submissions, or she's confident to land ground and pound from the floor. You know, especially against Jandiroba, every time she hit the mat, she was getting back up or landing, you know, stuff from the floor. And Jandiroba, for me, is probably the best wrestler in that women's division, and Dern coped really well with that. I just think in this fight, Dern is better everywhere. I think she's better at striking, has got more power than Robertson on the feet. I think on the ground as well, I think Robertson's a better wrestler, but I just think Dern, the jiu-jitsu, there's levels to the jiu-jitsu, unfortunately. And I think Robertson will get caught in something. I think maybe a sloppy takedown or it's on the mat. She thinks she's safe with ground and pound, and Dern just snatches up, like an arm bar or a head and arm triangle, something like that. So I'm going to go Dern. I think second round submission here. I think it'll be a decent fight though for as long as it lasts, but second round. Finally, we've got the main event, and I think the main event might be one of the more boring fights on the card. We have Islam Makhachev, 28-1, 34 years old, 5'10", against Ian Garry, the challenger, 17-1, 28 years old, 6'3". Ian Garry, very good fighter, very underrated for me, and I think he gets a lot of stick. But for me, Ian Garry is more of a point fighter. I don't think he's actively looking to finish these fights. He's very good everywhere. I think he's got decent wrestling, a sneaky jiu-jitsu game that he's improving. I think, with the work, and I'll touch on that in a second, but mainly Gary's primary thing is his striking. Very good leg kicks, very good head kicks, nice boxing, in and out, hit and not get hit is his style. Now, coming on to the other aspects, the wrestling, what I like about Garry, he's gone out and he's gone to specialists. He's working at Shooter Box to help with his striking. He's obviously going to be working with, like, Charles the Bronx, working on his jiu-jitsu. He's been working with Damian Maia on his jiu-jitsu. He's been working with Maia with the takedown defense, the takedown offense. And I think Garry is going to come in here a lot more well-rounded than people think. On the other hand, he's facing Islam Makhachev, possibly the best fighter in the world at this moment in time. Islam Makhachev has looked unbeatable. He has had a few scares. The Dustin Poirier fight went on a lot longer than I think he should have. And he also had that fight with Volkanovski where I thought it was very, very close. And then I know he beat Volkanovski in the second fight. Volkanovski took that on a week's notice, guys. Like, for me, that one doesn't count. The first one was excellent. It was two of the best mixed martial arts fighting at the same time, both champions, and it was very, very close. And that says a lot of things to me. Islam struggles when these guys can stop the takedowns. Dustin Poirier stopped numerous takedowns and, landed a lot of strikes on Makhachev. I think Garry could do the same here. Garry is a big welterweight. He's got the height. The height, will probably help him a little bit more. I've flip-flopped a few times this fight. I almost picked Garry, but what I can see here is just Garry doing very well in the first round. I think he'll keep it at distance, hitting the legs, the jab, circling a lot, and I think he'll manage to stay out of trouble for round one. Islam might get a late round one takedown, but I think it'll be mainly Garry that'll control the fight in the first round. I think the second round will start. Team Khabib will get to Islam and they'll give him a new game plan. You need to do this, work on this, to get the takedown from this thing. It's small things that the Khabib team realise, and I think that's what makes Makhachev as good and made Khabib as good. Small little adjustments you make during the fight. And I think that's what he'll do here. They might say, right, instead of going for the double leg takedown, take the single leg, do the leg sweep like you did with Poirier, get the body lock, sandball throw. They'll try different things, and I think eventually Islam will get one that will work. I think the work that Gary's put in with his wrestling defense and his submission defense will get him to the final horn here. And I think after maybe 1.5 rounds, I think Makhachev will take over, get a lot of control time, maybe threaten a few subs, but I think Garry will be safe. And I think Makhachev will, cruise to a 49-46 decision here. So guys, obviously enjoy the fight. Please give me a like and a follow. I'm just a random guy talking about UFC. I don't think I know everything. I just love the sport and I love chatting about it. It'd be nice to hear people in the comments. So enjoy the fight cards, guys. If you're English, it's crap because we've got to get up early. But yeah, take care, everyone. Bye.